My name is Angela, 27 years old. At family dinner last Sunday, my own father slammed his fist on the table, pointed at me, and sneered, "What's the point of being a soldier if you're still broke?" The room went silent, and everyone stared at me, waiting to see if I would break. My siblings smirked, my mother looked away, and all I could hear was the echo of that word, broke. They had no idea what I had been through. They didn't see the nights in the desert, the scars I carried, the brothers I lost. To them, I was just a disappointment in uniform. But as my father's voice dripped with mockery, I reached into my bag. And when I laid that small velvet case on the table, their laughter died instantly. What was inside changed everything. Before we continue, please subscribe. When my mother called earlier that week, her voice carried that mix of warmth and command only mothers seem to master. "Angela, we're all having dinner Sunday evening. Your father wants everyone together. Don't be late." I could hear pots clattering in the background, her way of multitasking between love and duty. I hesitated for a moment, holding my phone in silence. Family dinners were supposed to be about catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. But in my family, they often turned into subtle competitions, my siblings flaunting their careers, my parents reminding us of their sacrifices, and me, well, I was always the odd one out. Still, I agreed. "I'll be there, Mom." Sunday came faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my plain shirt, wondering if I should wear my uniform. Something inside me told me not to. Not tonight. I had just returned from deployment overseas, my body still adjusting to civilian rhythm, my mind still carrying memories I couldn't shake. But my parents didn't care much about that. To them, what mattered was proof money, stability, something they could boast about to their friends at church. I sighed and grabbed my car keys. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual. My hometown streets looked unchanged, but I felt different, like I didn't belong to the same world anymore. Soldiers know this feeling too well, the disconnect between where you've been and where people think you should fit. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the cars already lined up. My older brother's shiny new SUV gleamed under the streetlight. My younger sister's compact car looked brand new too. Both of them were doing well, at least by my parents' standards. A knot tightened in my stomach. The moment I walked in, the smell of roasted chicken and spices hit me, a reminder of childhood Sundays. My mother rushed over, hugging me with quick arms before moving on to fuss over the food. My father gave me a firm nod, the kind that said more about expectation than affection. My siblings, already seated, shot me the kind of smiles that weren't quite welcoming. I forced a smile back and sat down at the long wooden table. At first, everything seemed normal. We passed plates, exchanged small talk, and tried to laugh at light stories. My mother asked about my flight back home. My father asked about the weather overseas. And for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, the evening would remain peaceful. But beneath the surface, tension hummed like a live wire. My brother boasted about his recent promotion. My sister described her new apartment downtown. Both of them had the eager tone of people waiting to be applauded. My parents clapped and nodded, pride written across their faces. When it was my turn to speak, silence fell. I cleared my throat, unsure how much to say. What could I share? That I had seen men broken in ways that couldn't be healed? That I had spent nights awake with nothing but desert stars for company? That some mornings I wondered if I'd even make it back alive? None of that seemed like dinner conversation, so I kept it simple. "I just got back a few weeks ago. It's good to be home." The words fell flat. My father frowned slightly, as if waiting for more. My brother chuckled and sipped his drink. My sister glanced down at her plate, hiding a smile, and I sat there, already sensing that this dinner wasn't going to end like any ordinary family gathering. Something was coming, something I wasn't prepared for. The uneasy silence from the end of my last words lingered in the air, wrapping itself around the table like an invisible chain. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, measuring, weighing, comparing. My mother quickly tried to shift the mood by asking my brother more about his new office, but the tension had already begun to seep through the cracks. I pushed the mashed potatoes on my plate, pretending to be interested in the food, but my stomach was too tight to eat. My father sat back in his chair, his fork resting untouched, watching everyone with that calculating stare he always wore when deciding who had lived up to his expectations and who had fallen short. My brother leaned forward with a grin, recounting how his boss had praised him for landing a big client. He spoke with the kind of confidence that demanded attention, and he had it. My parents nodded, laughed, and clapped him on the back. Then my sister chimed in, describing the new high-rise apartment she had moved into, her voice sparkling with pride as she emphasized the view of the city skyline. My mother clasped her hands together as though this was the most wonderful accomplishment in the world. I wanted to be happy for them, I really did, but every word dug into me like a reminder of how little space I had in these conversations. When my father finally turned his gaze toward me, I knew what was coming. His lips pressed into a thin line, and his eyes narrowed. "So, Angela," he said slowly, almost too casually, "what exactly do you plan to do now that you're back? I mean, you've been gone for so long, but where's all of this leading?" His tone carried more judgment than curiosity. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced myself to answer evenly. "I'm still serving, Dad. I have responsibilities. It's not just a job, it's my calling." That single word, calling, seemed to set him off. He scoffed under his breath and shook his head. "Calling doesn't pay bills. Calling doesn't build a future. Look at your brother, look at your sister. They're building something solid, something real. And you." He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished, but the meaning was sharp enough to cut. My brother smirked into his glass. My sister shifted uncomfortably, but her silence was an answer on its own. I clenched my hands under the table, nails digging into my palms as heat rushed to my face. Every instinct told me to defend myself, to tell them that while they were chasing promotions and apartments, I had been dodging bullets and carrying men out of fire. But how do you make people understand a life they've never lived? How do you explain that the price of service isn't measured in paychecks, but in scars, some visible, others buried too deep to see? My father leaned forward now, his voice growing harder. "You're 27 years old, Angela. What do you have to show for it? No house, no car worth mentioning, no savings, just that uniform." The words stung because they echoed the doubts I sometimes whispered to myself at night. I tried to swallow them down, but the room felt smaller, the walls pressing in with every judgmental glance. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by a strained quiet. Even the clinking of cutlery seemed louder. I sat there, staring at the roasted chicken on my plate, but all I could taste was bitterness. My mother cleared her throat, forcing a smile, trying desperately to redirect the conversation. But the damage was done. The weight of my father's words sat heavy in the center of the table, and no amount of small talk could erase it. I knew then that this dinner wasn't just a family gathering, it was a test, one where I was already failing in their eyes. Yet deep inside, I also knew they hadn't seen the full story, not yet. The silence after my father's cutting words stretched longer than I could bear. My fork hovered above my plate, my appetite gone. I forced myself to breathe evenly, but my chest felt tight, like every breath carried the weight of years I had tried to bury. It wasn't just about tonight. His words had dragged me back to every moment I had ever felt like a disappointment in this family. Memories I had worked hard to silence began creeping in, demanding to be heard. I remembered being 18, standing in the kitchen with my enlistment papers in hand, heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. My father's face that day mirrored the same expression he wore tonight: disbelief, frustration, disappointment. "Why throw your life away?" he had asked, as though serving my country was a reckless whim rather than a decision rooted in conviction. My mother tried to smooth things over then too, urging him to at least support me, but his silence that followed spoke louder than any words. That wound had never healed, only scabbed over, and tonight he had ripped it open again. As I sat at the dinner table, my brother chuckled about how tough the market was and how only the sharpest people could survive in his field. My sister laughed, adding that not everyone was cut out for success. Their words weren't aimed directly at me, but I could feel the edge of their meaning, and it stung like salt in an open wound. My hands tightened around my napkin, twisting it under the table so no one could see how much I was shaking. I wanted to speak up, to tell them I wasn't chasing shallow victories, but fighting battles they couldn't imagine. Yet the words stuck in my throat, tangled between pride and pain. All I could think of were the long nights overseas, the brothers I had lost, the fear that haunted me every time I closed my eyes. These weren't stories to be casually shared over roasted chicken and gravy. They were scars, too raw, too sacred to throw into a conversation that would likely dismiss them anyway. My father's voice cut through my thoughts. You know, Angela, when I was your age, I already had a family, a mortgage, a plan, responsibility. His words carried the weight of judgment, as if I had wasted my life chasing shadows. The unfairness of it boiled inside me. He didn't know what it felt like to carry responsibility for lives beyond your own, to make split-second decisions that determined who went home and who didn't. He measured responsibility in paychecks and possessions, while I measured mine in body counts and folded flags. I glanced at my mother, hoping for some form of defense, but she stayed quiet, her eyes darting between us like a referee too tired to blow the whistle. My brother poured himself another glass of wine, clearly entertained by the spectacle. My sister picked at her food, a smirk tugging at her lips as though she relished my silence. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. The evening was no longer about dinner. It was a battlefield of its own, one where I had no weapons, only the resilience I had learned to carry. Old wounds pulsed inside me, memories of being underestimated, mocked and dismissed not just as a soldier, but as their child. It was the same cycle playing on repeat, me on the defensive, them demanding proof that I was worth something. I stared at the table, my jaw clenched, as the voices around me blurred into background noise. In that moment, I knew I couldn't keep quiet much longer. If they wanted proof, then proof was what they would get. Not yet, but soon. And when it came, it would silence every mocking word they had ever spoken. The atmosphere at the table had shifted from uneasy to suffocating. Every laugh that erupted from my brother felt rehearsed. Every compliment my parents gave him felt like a slap across my face. I tried to drown it out by focusing on the food, but each bite turned to ash in my mouth. I reminded myself to stay calm, to breathe, to not let them see me break. But then it happened by the words that pierced deeper than any of the subtle jabs before. My father leaned back in his chair, his voice booming over the clatter of cutlery. Angela, I just don't understand. You've been in the military for years, and what do you have to show for it? You're still broke. He said it as though the word itself carried some undeniable truth, something final that defined me entirely. The table went silent, and I felt every muscle in my body stiffen. My brother's lips twitched as though he wanted to laugh. My sister covered her mouth with her hand to hide a grin, and my mother closed her eyes like she wished she could rewind the moment. The word echoed in my head, broke. It was more than just an insult. It was a dismissal of everything I had endured, every sacrifice I had made, every part of myself I had given up for a purpose they could never understand. My father hadn't just questioned my choices, he had reduced them to nothing, stripping away all the meaning I had found in serving. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to lash out because I knew if I opened my mouth now, my voice would shake, and I refused to let them see weakness. Still, the silence dragged on, and my father seemed to take it as permission to continue. You're 27, Angela. Other people your age have families, homes, savings. You're still drifting around in a uniform like it's some kind of excuse not to grow up. His words sliced through me, each one sharper than the last. My brother chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as though to agree. My sister reached for her wine, sipping slowly, clearly savoring the drama unfolding before her. I stared at my plate, but my mind wasn't on the food. Images flashed through my thoughts, faces of soldiers who never made it back. Nights spent under enemy fire, mornings when I questioned whether I would live to see another sunrise. How could I explain that money had never been the measure of my life, that the price I paid was measured in blood, sweat, and sleepless nights? They would never understand. To them, I wasn't a soldier. I was a disappointment who had failed to play the game they valued most. My chest burned with the weight of unspoken words. I wanted to tell them that the reason I didn't have a shiny car or a new apartment was because I had been too busy serving something greater than myself. That I had medals, yes, but more than that, I had honor, loyalty, and resilience carved into me in ways they could never buy. But I sat in silence, my hands clenched under the table, my nails digging so deep into my palms that I wondered if I would draw blood. My mother finally tried to intervene, her voice soft but unsteady. Please, Let's not do this tonight. We're supposed to be together as a family, but her plea fell flat. The damage was done. My father's words hung heavy in the air, poisoning the rest of the evening. As I looked around the table at the smug faces of my siblings and the disappointment etched into my father's expression, something hardened inside me. They thought they knew my story. They thought their version of success gave them the right to judge. But soon, very soon, they were going to see the truth. And when they did, their laughter would die in their throats. The sting of my father's words still hung in the air, but I forced myself to raise my head and offer a small, almost mechanical smile. It wasn't real, not even close, but it was the shield I had learned to wear. Rage simmered beneath the surface, but I kept it locked tight, hidden where no one could see. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. My father leaned back in his chair with a smug kind of satisfaction, as if he had just spoken an undeniable truth. My brother chuckled low, shaking his head, and muttered, "Guess Dad's right." My sister joined in with a giggle, glancing at me like I was some kind of punchline. My mother looked helpless, torn between her loyalty to my father and the faint instinct to protect me, but even she remained silent. Inside, though, I was burning. Every muscle in my body screamed to snap back, to lay everything bare and remind them who I was and what I had endured. But I knew shouting wouldn't change anything. If I lashed out, it would only confirm the picture they had already painted of me: bitter, unstable, defensive. So instead, I smiled. A tight, practiced smile that disguised the storm inside me. They thought I was swallowing my pride. But what they didn't realize was that I was already planning my next move. As the conversation shifted back to my brother's promotion and my sister's apartment, I sat quietly, nodding when necessary, pretending to listen. But I was far away, lost in memories of the battlefield. I remembered the sound of gunfire cracking through the night, the weight of a comrade's body in my arms, the smell of dust and smoke that clung to my skin long after I returned home. I had survived things they couldn't even imagine, yet here I was, treated like the weak link in the family. My rage deepened, but so did my resolve. Every so often, I caught my father glancing at me, his expression unreadable, like he was waiting for me to protest, to defend myself, to fight back. But I didn't give him that. Instead, I smiled again, steady and calm, and watched the confusion flicker across his face. My silence unsettled him more than any argument could have. He had expected me to explode, to crumble, but I gave him nothing. I refused to let him see the war raging inside me. I thought about the medal tucked carefully in my bag, the one I hadn't planned to bring out tonight. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was proof, tangible proof, that I had given more than any of them could ever understand. They valued paychecks and possessions, but this medal represented lives saved, battles endured, and courage tested under fire. They might call me broke, but they didn't know the worth of what I carried. Not yet. Dinner dragged on, every laugh from my siblings like fuel on the fire inside me. But I kept my smile in place, letting them think I was unaffected. It was almost amusing in a way, how blind they were. They believed they were tearing me down, but in reality, they were setting the stage for the moment that would shatter their smugness. By the time dessert was served, I had already decided I would wait. I would let them finish their little show, let them bask in their imagined superiority. Then, when the time was right, I would reveal the truth they had mocked into silence. And when I did, my smile would be the only warning they'd get before their laughter died. The smile I wore felt like a mask glued to my face, and beneath it, my jaw ached from clenching so tightly. I had managed to swallow my father's insult, managed to sit through the smug glances and the pointed comparisons. But the night wasn't finished with me yet. It was as if the entire table had silently agreed that I was the evening's entertainment, the weak link whose life choices made for an easy target. The first laugh started with my brother, low and careless, as he swirled the wine in his glass. "You know, Angie," he said, using the nickname I hated, "maybe Dad's right. I mean, you come back here after all these years, and what do you really have? A uniform, some stories, that doesn't exactly scream success." He chuckled again, shaking his head, and my sister joined in with her soft, mocking laugh. I felt the sound of their laughter like needles pricking under my skin. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, deliberate. My sister leaned forward, her voice dripping with sweetness that barely concealed the venom. "Don't take it the wrong way, Angela. We're just saying maybe if you had taken a different path, you wouldn't be struggling so much. You know, something practical like we did." She smiled at me, the kind of smile people give when they want to appear helpful but really mean harm. My mother sighed, stirring her mashed potatoes as if the act could drown out the words being spoken. My father, however, didn't stop them. He chuckled too, nodding slightly, as though their ridicule was not only acceptable but deserved. Their laughter grew bolder, filling the room in waves that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about this dinner, it was years of feeling second best, years of being treated like the child who never measured up. They had always had their milestones to flaunt, and I had always been the one they doubted, the one they saw as reckless for leaving home, reckless for choosing service over comfort. I sat still, forcing my face to remain calm, but inside, anger was coursing through me like fire. I wanted to shout, to slam my fists on the table and remind them of the things I had survived, the sacrifices they would never comprehend. But what good would it do? To them, my experiences weren't real currency. They couldn't be deposited in a bank account, couldn't be posted as a shiny update on social media. Their version of success was material, and mine would never fit into that narrow frame. So I stayed silent, though the rage burned so hot I could taste it. My brother leaned back in his chair, grinning like he had just won something. "You're tough, Angela, I'll give you that. But toughness doesn't pay rent." He laughed again, clinking his glass against my father's in some unspoken toast to their shared perspective. My sister's giggle followed, high-pitched and grating, and for a moment I thought I might actually choke on the bitterness rising in my throat. I caught my mother's eyes briefly, and for the first time that evening I saw something flicker there. Guilt. She didn't join in the laughter, but she didn't stop it either. She looked down quickly, as if afraid to take my side, as if even that would break the delicate balance of loyalty in the room. The laughter finally faded into casual chatter again, but its echo lingered, bouncing inside my chest like an unwanted drum. They thought I was beaten, that their words and laughter had shrunk me into silence. What they didn't know was that I was only waiting, biding my time, because soon the balance of power would shift, and when it did, their laughter would be the very thing that haunted them. The laughter around the table faded into background noise, but inside my mind, another soundtrack began to play. As my brother grinned and my sister smirked, I drifted back to moments far from this polished dining room. The smell of roasted chicken was replaced by the scent of dust and diesel. The clinking of silverware turned into the metallic snap of weapons being locked and loaded, and the warm glow of the chandelier above us became the harsh, flickering light of a desert night. Their words might have labeled me broke, but the currency I had paid was something they would never dare to touch. I remembered a night overseas, crouched in the dirt with my heart hammering so loud I thought the enemy could hear it. The air was thick with fear, every second stretching into an eternity as we waited for orders to move. I thought about Private Ramirez, the youngest in our unit, only 19, who joked nervously about wanting to go home and eat his mother's cooking again. He never got that chance. A few hours later, I was dragging his lifeless body back under fire, praying I wouldn't be next. That memory never left me. Every time my family mocked me for not owning more, I thought of Ramirez's mother, who would have traded every dollar in her account just to see her son alive. Another memory surfaced, uninvited but sharp. The long nights when I lay awake under foreign skies, the stars my only companions, wondering if tomorrow would come. I remembered writing letters I was never sure I'd have the chance to send. I remembered missing birthdays, holidays, milestones that my siblings bragged about while I was half a world away. They measured life in promotions and possessions. I measured it in survival. And yet here I was, made to feel small because my sacrifices couldn't be displayed like trophies in a glass case. As I sat at the table, smiling faintly while they continued their shallow talk, I felt the weight of those memories pressing down on me. I thought about the day I received the medal that now rested in my bag. The ceremony had been brief, almost quiet, nothing like the celebratory dinners my family threw for job promotions. My commanding officer shook my hand and thanked me for bravery under fire. I remembered standing there, humbled and heavy-hearted, thinking of all the faces that couldn't stand with me. That medal wasn't just mine, it belonged to the men and women who never made it back. It was a symbol of loss as much as it was of courage. The more I thought about it, the more their laughter replayed in my head, and the more it burned. They had no idea what it had cost me to sit at that table with them, alive but forever changed. They had no idea how many nights I woke drenched in sweat, hearing echoes of gunfire that weren't really there. They had no idea that the uniform they mocked had been the only thing holding me together when everything else threatened to unravel. I wanted to tell them, to throw every memory onto the table until their smug expressions cracked under the weight of it, but I didn't, because I knew they weren't ready to hear it, and even if they did hear, they might never truly understand. So I sat quietly, letting the memories wash over me like a tide, each one a reminder of why I couldn't let their mockery define me. They thought I was silent because I was defeated. They thought I was sitting still because I had nothing left to say. But in reality, my silence was filled with every sacrifice they couldn't see and every moment that had shaped me into someone far stronger than their laughter could ever break. The memories weighed heavy, pressing against my chest as the chatter around the table carried on without me. My siblings laughed about work gossip and weekend plans. My father nodded proudly at their accomplishments, and my mother kept her eyes lowered, stirring her drink like she was hoping to disappear into it. I sat there quietly, the ghost of Private Ramirez still lingering in my mind, the sound of distant gunfire echoing faintly in my ears. They thought my silence was defeat, but in truth it was restraint, because hidden inside my bag was a secret that none of them knew existed. Something that would change the entire tone of the evening. The medal wasn't just a piece of metal on a ribbon. It was a story, a symbol, and in many ways, a scar. I hadn't planned to bring it. In fact, I had wrestled with the decision before leaving for dinner, tucking it into my bag almost absent-mindedly, as though some part of me knew tonight would test me. Every time my brother smirked, every time my sister giggled, every time my father called me broke without hesitation, I thought of that medal. It wasn't money, it wasn't property, but it was proof of something they had never understood. Worth measured by sacrifice, not possessions. I glanced around the table, my fingers brushing against the strap of my bag on the chair beside me. No one noticed. They were too wrapped up in their own conversations, too convinced that I had nothing to offer. My father leaned back, sipping his drink with the kind of ease that only comes from believing you are unquestionably right. My brother bragged about how his boss wanted to recommend him for another project, and my sister chimed in about a vacation she was planning with her friends. I sat there, calm on the surface, but inside my chest, my heart pounded with the knowledge of what I carried. It was strange, really, how something so small could hold so much weight. That medal had been awarded for a night I rarely spoke about, a night when chaos threatened to swallow everything. I remembered the sound of shouting, the blur of movement, the moment when I had to make a choice that could have ended my life. Courage wasn't glamorous. It wasn't neat or tidy. It was messy, painful, and often left behind a trail of loss. But for what I had done that night, the army had chosen to honor me. And now, here I was, sitting at a family table, mocked and dismissed, while the very evidence of my sacrifice sat inches away, unseen. A part of me wanted to keep it that way, to never reveal it, to let them remain blind, because what did their approval even mean anymore? But another part of me, the part that had endured their belittlement for years, burned with the desire to finally make them see, not for validation, but for justice. They needed to know that beneath the surface of their assumptions lived a truth far greater than their narrow definitions of success. I looked at my father again, at the set of his jaw, the smugness in his eyes. He had no idea. None of them did. And that was my secret, one I had carried silently, one I had allowed to remain hidden because I thought they wouldn't understand. But now I realized this secret wasn't meant to stay buried. Tonight wasn't just about enduring their laughter. Tonight was about ending it. I straightened slightly in my chair, my hand still resting against the bag. They kept talking, but I barely heard them, because in my mind I had already decided. The soldier's secret would not stay hidden much longer, and when it was revealed, silence would be the only sound left in the room. My hand lingered on the strap of my bag, but I didn't move it, not yet. The time wasn't right, and I knew that if I pulled the medal out too soon, it would be wasted on ears too stubborn to listen. so I let the conversation carry on, forcing my face to remain calm, even though my chest was tight with the weight of everything I wanted to say. My father laughed at my brother's story about a work trip, his pride glowing as he leaned across the table to clap him on the back. My sister scrolled through her phone mid-conversation, showing pictures of her new apartment, her manicure flashing under the chandelier. Their pride swelled around me like smoke, thick and suffocating, as though their accomplishments were the only ones that mattered. I sipped my water slowly, watching them, every smile they exchanged, every knowing glance that skipped past me like I wasn't even in the room, reminded me of how many times I had been invisible at this table. I thought about all the times growing up when I had worked hard, when I had dreamed big, only to be told that my choices weren't enough. Pride had always lived here, but it was never mine. Tonight, though, it wasn't just their pride I saw, it was my pain reflected in the cracks of it. Because deep down, beneath all their boasts, there was something fragile. My brother, for all his bravado, never looked me in the eye for long. He cracked jokes and laughed louder than necessary, as if trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. My sister's giggles had a sharpness to them, like she was laughing to cover insecurity. And my father, though his words carried weight, carried a shadow in his eyes when no one was looking. It was pride, yes, but pride built on fragile ground. And what hurt the most was that their pride needed my pain to survive. They lifted themselves higher by pushing me lower. For a moment, I wondered if saying nothing would be the truest revenge, if walking away with my secret intact, leaving them blind to the truth, would wound them more than any reveal ever could. But then my father's voice cut through again, sharp as ever. Angela, you really need to start thinking seriously about your future. You can't keep floating around. Life isn't going to wait for you to get it together. His words hit like a blow, reopening the sting of broke, reminding me again of the wounds they loved to poke at. I felt my chest tighten, but I smiled. Not the polite, fragile smile from earlier. This one was steady, deliberate, almost defiant. I met his eyes directly, holding his stare until his smug expression faltered just slightly. You'd be surprised at what I've managed to put together, Dad, I said softly, my voice carrying just enough edge to make him pause. The table quieted for a moment, the laughter dying in their throats as they sensed a shift. My brother raised an eyebrow. My sister tilted her head curiously. My mother looked at me with a mix of hope and fear, like she knew something was coming. In that silence, the air thickened. Pride, once loud and boisterous, now sat uneasy, unsure. I didn't reveal the metal yet. I wasn't ready, but the way they looked at me changed, if only slightly. They weren't laughing now. And for the first time all night, I felt the balance start to shift. Their pride had fed on my silence, but now my silence had teeth. It was no longer submission, it was patience. The pain they had inflicted still burned in my chest, but now it was no longer weakness. It was fuel, and I knew the moment was coming soon when their pride would crumble under the weight of the truth they had mocked into silence. The silence that followed my words was fragile, as though the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. My father's smirk had faltered. My brother had leaned back with a skeptical grin, and my sister's fork hovered in mid-air as though frozen by curiosity. My mother's eyes flicked nervously between us, sensing the shift but not knowing what it meant. For the first time all evening, the laughter was gone. The pride that had filled the room seemed to stumble, just a little, unsure of its footing. I let the pause stretch, steadying my breath, reminding myself that I didn't need to rush. Timing mattered. My father broke the silence first, clearing his throat as though reclaiming control. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his tone sharper now, less smug. It was the tone of someone who realized, maybe, for the first time, that he didn't know everything. I met his eyes without flinching. "It means you've been measuring me with the wrong ruler," I said calmly. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't shaky or defensive. It was grounded, steady, carrying the weight of something more than words. My brother snorted, trying to bring the tension back to mockery. "What are you talking about, Angela? You sound dramatic. You've got nothing to show, and now you're talking like you've been hiding some kind of empire." His laugh was forced, though, the kind that betrayed unease. My sister giggled, but it lacked the sting it had carried earlier. She leaned forward, eyes glinting. Well then, show us. What exactly are we missing? I reached down slowly, my hand brushing against the strap of my bag. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had kept this moment locked inside me for so long, unsure if it was even worth sharing, unsure if they deserved to see. But tonight, with their words still echoing in my chest, I knew it was time. I pulled the bag onto my lap and unzipped it carefully, the sound of the zipper slicing through the silence like a blade. My father's eyes narrowed, my brother leaned forward slightly, and my sister tilted her head, curious but unconvinced. From inside, I drew out the small velvet case, dark and unassuming, the kind of thing you might overlook if you didn't know better. I placed it gently on the table right in front of me. For a moment, no one moved. The case sat there like a secret waiting to be spoken aloud. My father frowned. "What's that?" he asked. His voice had lost some of its authority. My brother squinted, trying to piece it together. My sister rolled her eyes as if expecting a cheap trick. I kept my gaze steady on the case. "This," I said softly, "is the proof you've all been waiting for. Proof that while you were busy counting promotions and square footage, I was out there fighting for something bigger than myself." My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. The weight of the truth did the speaking for me. My mother's hand rose slightly toward her mouth as though bracing herself. I didn't open it yet. I wanted them to sit with the suspense, to feel the gravity of the moment pressing down on them. My father leaned forward, his expression shifting from annoyance to something closer to apprehension. My brother's smirk faltered. My sister stopped smiling altogether. The velvet case was small, but in that moment it felt larger than every boast and insult they had thrown my way. Their pride had been loud all night, but now silence reigned. And in that silence, I held the power. They didn't know it yet, but everything they thought they understood about me was about to unravel. The revelation was coming, and none of them were ready for it. The velvet case sat in front of me, small and unassuming, but I could feel the way it pulled everyone's eyes toward it. My father's frown deepened, as if he couldn't decide whether it was worth his attention or not. My brother leaned forward with that same half-amused expression he always wore when he thought I was bluffing. My sister tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her face, though she tried to mask it with disinterest. My mother, though, she stared at the case with wide eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap like she already suspected what was inside. For a few seconds, I just let it sit there. The silence stretched across the table, heavier with each passing moment. Then, without saying a word, I placed my fingers on the lid and opened it slowly. The hinges creaked faintly, and the metal inside caught the light of the chandelier, gleaming like a silent testimony. It wasn't flashy or gaudy, just a polished circle of metal hanging from its ribbon. But the moment it appeared, the entire atmosphere shifted. My father's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, studying it, his face unreadable. My brother stopped smirking. My sister blinked rapidly as though unsure of what she was looking at, and my mother exhaled softly, her lips parting in a mix of pride and sorrow. I lifted the metal gently from the case and laid it on the center of the table. It looked almost out of place on the polished wood among the plates and glasses, yet it belonged there more than any of us. "This," I said quietly, "is what I've been doing all these years while you've been keeping score of who bought what, who got promoted, and who looks the most successful. This isn't about money or apartments. This is about nights I wasn't sure I'd live through. It's about men and women who didn't make it back home. It's about what it means to serve when no one else wants to." My voice was steady, and for once, no one interrupted me. The metal seemed to glow under the light, commanding the kind of respect words could never earn. My father's jaw tightened. He didn't speak, but the way he stared told me he was wrestling with something. My brother leaned back, his smirk gone, his face blank. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze darting between me and the metal like she was trying to reconcile the image of the sister she mocked with the soldier who had earned that honor. "I know you think I'm broke," I continued, looking directly at my father. "And maybe in your world, I am. But in mine, I've already paid a price you'll never understand. And I've been rewarded with something you can't buy, something you can't fake. This medal isn't just mine. It represents lives I fought to protect. It represents sacrifices you've never even had to think about." My words fell heavy. But it was the metal itself that did the talking. It sat there silently, undeniable and unyielding, daring anyone to laugh now. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My brother avoided my gaze. My sister folded her arms, but her silence betrayed her. And my father, he sat the stillest of them all, his face tense, his pride battling with something deeper. For the first time that evening, no one had a clever remark, no one had a joke. The metal silenced them in a way my words never could. And as I looked at each of their faces, I knew the dinner had shifted. The power no longer belonged to their laughter. It belonged to the truth lying on the table. For the first time that evening, the dining room was utterly quiet. No clinking of glasses, no bursts of laughter, no sly remarks disguised as jokes. The metal sat in the center of the table like a mirror, reflecting back everything they had said about me. My father stared at it as though it were a puzzle he couldn't solve. His earlier confidence, that booming voice that had called me a broke soldier, was gone. In its place was a silence so deep it almost startled me. My brother, who had been smirking all night, now leaned back with his arms crossed, his face pale. My sister's eyes darted from the metal to me, then back again, as though she were trying to process what she was seeing. My mother's lips trembled, her eyes shining with tears she hadn't expected to shed. The weight of the silence pressed against all of us, but I didn't rush to fill it. I wanted them to sit in it, to feel what it meant to be humbled without a word. I watched my father shift in his chair, his hand tightening around his fork even though he wasn't eating. He looked like a man who had been confronted with something he didn't want to see, something that forced him to question the way he had judged his own child. Pride doesn't shatter easily, but regret had crept into his eyes, faint and undeniable. My brother was the first to try to speak, but his words stumbled. "So that's, an actual medal?" he asked, his voice stripped of the sarcasm that usually laced every sentence. He sounded younger somehow, unsure of himself. I looked at him steadily. "Yes, it's an actual medal. Awarded for actions your jokes could never measure up to." He swallowed hard and looked away, his jaw tight, but he didn't say another word. My sister broke next. "I didn't know you had that," she whispered, her tone softer than I had ever heard it. There was no smugness, no giggle hiding behind her words, just uncertainty, maybe even shame. "No, you didn't," I replied, "because none of you ever cared to ask. It was easier to assume I was nothing than to believe I was out there doing something you couldn't imagine." She lowered her eyes, her face flushing with the sting of truth. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Angela, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you sooner." She reached for my hand, but I didn't move mine. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to understand that apologies, though welcome, couldn't erase years of silence. Her tears spilled anyway, glistening trails of regret on her cheeks. And then my father finally looked at me. His face was stiff, his pride fighting desperately not to crumble, but his eyes betrayed him. They were heavy, almost haunted. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "I didn't realize." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was as close as he could come in that moment. I leaned back, my own expression calm but unyielding. "You didn't want to realize," I answered, "because realizing would have meant admitting you were wrong about me. And that's something you never let yourself do." The words landed like stones, and I saw the way his face tightened. For once, he had no response. The silence stretched on again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of dismissal or mockery. It was the silence of realization, of regret seeping into every corner of the room. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by something they couldn't joke away. And as I looked at each of their faces, I knew this dinner would never be forgotten, not because of the food or the stories, but because the truth had finally taken its place at the table, and it demanded their respect. The silence around the table lingered like smoke after a fire, thick and unshakable. The metal still sat gleaming in the center, untouched yet commanding all of their attention. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself a steady breath. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the outsider at my own family's table. The power had shifted, and I had not raised my voice, had not slammed my fists, had not begged for recognition. All I had done was lay down the truth they could no longer deny. My brother cleared his throat again, but whatever words he meant to say never formed. He shifted uncomfortably, the arrogance he had flaunted earlier nowhere to be found. My sister kept her eyes on her plate, tracing the rim with her fork like a nervous child. My mother sniffled quietly, wiping her tears and stealing glances at me, her expression a mixture of sorrow and pride. And my father, he sat the stillest of them all, his fork untouched, his eyes fixed on the metal as though it had carved open something inside him. For years I had been their disappointment. For years their laughter had been at my expense. They had measured me against standards I never agreed to live by, and every time I came up short, they reminded me of it. Tonight, however, the balance was undone. Their pride had been silenced, and their smug certainty had cracked under the weight of my sacrifice. The sweet taste of revenge wasn't in humiliating them or making them beg. It was in watching the truth undo everything they thought they knew about me. I let the quiet hang for a while longer, then finally spoke. All those years you called me reckless. All those times you thought I was wasting my life. This is what I was doing. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because it mattered, because someone had to do it. My voice was calm, even gentle, but it carried the sharpness of a blade. No one interrupted me. No one dared. My father finally tore his eyes away from the metal and looked at me. His face was pale, his pride clearly warring with something softer he didn't know how to express. "Angela," he began, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I was wrong. The words were halting, almost foreign in his mouth, but they were real. For a man who had built his life on never admitting fault, that was the deepest cut of all. I nodded slowly, not gloating, not smirking, just steady. "You were," I said simply. He flinched slightly, but he didn't argue. My brother looked away, my sister pressed her lips together, and my mother finally reached across the table, this time resting her hand gently on mine. I let it stay there. The revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, it was in the silence, in their regret, in the way the room felt heavier now that they understood, even if only a little, what they had dismissed for so long. I didn't need to rub it in. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth had already done the work for me. As the dinner wound down, the metal remained on the table, untouched, a quiet witness to everything that had been said and unsaid. And when I finally stood to leave, I slipped it back into its case, tucking it into my bag, knowing that I didn't need their approval to validate it. I had already won. My revenge was simple. They would never look at me the same way again. And that was enough. The dining room was quiet when I finally stood, my bag resting against my side, the metal tucked safely, inside once more. But its presence lingered on the table even after it was gone, like an invisible imprint no one could erase. My family had come into this dinner certain of who I was, a broke soldier, the disappointment, the one who never measured up. Yet by the end, they couldn't even look at me the same way. Their laughter, their jabs, their smugness, all of it had withered in the face of a truth they could never take away. That was the power reversal moment. For years, I had been the silent one, carrying the sting of their words, swallowing my pride to keep the peace. They thought that made me weak, that silence meant defeat. But they didn't understand that silence can also be strength. That night, my silence became the stage upon which their pride collapsed. I didn't fight back with anger. I didn't raise my voice or beg for their recognition. I simply placed the truth before them and let it do the work, and when the truth spoke, it left them with nothing to say. I saw it in my father's eyes, the same man who had called me broke with such confidence. For the first time, his words had failed him. Pride had carried him this far, but pride couldn't erase the gleam of that metal. My brother, so quick to joke, was suddenly lost for words. My sister, so quick to laugh, found no humor in the silence. Even my mother, who had stayed quiet for too long, finally looked at me with tears that carried both regret and pride. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly. It was something deeper vindication. The sweetest revenge wasn't their regret. It wasn't even their silence. It was the shift I felt inside myself. For so long, I believed their version of success defined me. But as I stood there, I realized I never needed their approval. Their laughter didn't diminish my sacrifices, and their doubt didn't erase what I had endured. My worth had never been measured by their standards. It had always been there, carved into me by the nights I survived, the lives I fought to protect, and the courage I carried when fear threatened to consume me. That's what I want you to take from this story. Maybe you've been mocked, maybe you've been doubted, maybe you've been underestimated by the very people who should have supported you most. But remember this, you don't need their applause to validate your journey. One day, your truth will speak louder than every insult, every laugh, every dismissal. And when it does, the reversal will come. The ones who look down on you will be the ones looking up, their pride silenced by the undeniable weight of your reality. So, the next time someone calls you less, remember, it's not your job to convince them. Live your truth, hold it close, and when the time is right, let it shine. Because when the tables finally turn, you won't need to shout. You'll only need to stand, and the truth will do the rest. This story may have ended, but the message lingers. For more raw and real moments like this, click on the left and subscribe to walk alongside more women finding their strength. Healing takes time, but it's possible.